Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kvetchfest. I'm Jen,
I'm Debbie.
and today we're going to talk about to be or not to be a parent. This is something that's been on my mind for, I would say, years now at this point, oscillating between becoming a parent or remaining child free. And I'd love to hear my mom's perspective on what it was like to be a parent and how she chose that for herself. And our lives are just very different. Things changing and societal changes, but also when she was my age, she already had 2 kids and I have 0. But times were very different for both of us at these ages. So I'm very interested in diving into the parenthood conversation and what my life is like and why I feel not the need to remain child free, but kind of choosing that for myself for a lot of reasons, but still wondering if that's what I want to end up doing. So, with that being said, Mom, how did you decide to become a parent? Was that just something that you always wanted to be? Because that's what I hear a lot of parents say. They say, oh, I always wanted to be a parent. But for me, I don't, people would say to me, oh, you'd be such a good caretaker, you'd be such a good mom when you're older, like when I was young, like in my teenage years or even in my 20s. But that seems so far away to me at the time. And also, it was so abstract that I couldn't really picture that. But there were other things I could picture. But I could never really picture myself being a parent. I love children and I love hanging out with kids. And have taught children and all of that. So I think I have that experience about what it's like to be with children 40 hours a week from a young age. Maybe that helped persuade me in a certain direction. I don't know. But there's so many reasons. But anyway, what was your life like leading up to having kids?
Well, I think that being that I'm a pretty traditional person, I don't know that I actually formulated a pros or cons
Oh,
for
really?
having children.
But you are a pros and cons person. And
I
I'm interested in the
am.
fact that you said that you are a traditionalist. That's kind of strikes me as interesting. Like, really? You see yourself as a traditionalist?
Well, I see myself traditional in certain. Yes, I do. I see myself traditional in certain aspects of life.
Okay.
Like, well, this is going to sound non-traditional now that I start this, but I will backtrack. But get married, have kids, find a place to live, or
Yeah.
maybe you found a place to live before that, have a job. Those were things that were what I consider traditional because I think that was the track that pretty much I saw everybody on when I was growing up.
So did you have a
Right?
5-year plan when you were 18 that said okay, I'm going to finish my college degree and then I'm going to get married and then I'm going to have a kid by the age of, 27?
No. I
No.
didn't I
Okay.
didn't live like that. I don't know well,
Who
because
does?
you know why? Well, a lot of people do, and they have
A
a
lot of
lot of
people do.
shoulds,
Yeah.
and I think I had a lot of shoulds as well, but in a different way. I think it's because both of my parents were very pragmatic,
Mhm.
but my mother was more, sort of spontaneous, more willing to have adventure, and my dad was more straight and narrow on the line sort of person. And
Mhm.
I really believe that they could have stayed together if they had really appreciated how those differences actually worked. Because as a child from them, they were really good at pretty much saying the same things to me. So their philosophies were very similar, but I think they just drove each other crazy because my mom was very creative and would start things on a fly, and my
Mhm.
dad was very, organized and meticulous. And I think those small things in relationship is what generally erodes relationships. It's not the big
Yeah.
philosophical, political, religious things because they agreed on all those things.
Right.
So I think that I thought I was going to have children because of my mother, because of the playfulness that she brought to parenting, which I
Oh,
thought I could emulate if I
yeah.
became a parent.
Do you think you
But
did?
yes, to a
Yeah.
certain, I think I always tell people that I think I'm a pretty nice combination of my mom's sort of spontaneity and my dad's sort of more grounded personality.
Mhm.
Yeah, I kind of believe that. I don't know that I'm as creative as my mom was, but I tried to do
Mhm.
things that were kind of like that, or at least go to places where somebody else could do it, and I could immersed you in it,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And I think that because my parents were typically a good decade younger than my peers, my parents were more child-centered because that was more of something that was happening, and more child psychologically oriented. Did that make sense what I just said? And so I think there was a lot of focus on us during a time where some parents didn't do that.
Sure.
That kids were there, but the focus wasn't on the kids. I think
Right.
now that time has passed, I would say it's probably a good idea to have a really nice balance between being child focused and being couple focused. Because
Yeah.
without the strength of the couple, you can't really have. Oh, I would say that people who have children or are contemplating having children should really have good discussions with their continual discussions before children and during children with their partners to make sure the relationship itself is still being nurtured between the two grown-ups, as well as being nurtured with as parental figures for the
Yeah.
children. So that seems to be a big deal for me when I think
Right.
back.
Yeah.
But I never had, well, I guess I shouldn't say never. I think when I started to get towards my mid 20s, I started to think, if I'm going to have children, I need to do this sooner than later, kind of thing.
Okay.
And I think it was because there's medical reasons for it, but times have changed, and you
Sure.
can prolong pregnancies. You can also do get have children all different ways, but than the traditional way. So I think I started thinking about 25 that I needed to sort of more seriously consider having children, and some of our friends were having children.
Yeah.
I think I wanted the experience of pregnancy,
Right.
and I don't think I ever thought I would not have children. It was just a question of when.
Okay.
So I finally decided to do that when I was 27. And I remember being totally scared once I made the decision to have unprotected sex.
You're like, holy
Which-
shit, what did I just do?
Yeah, I'm like, oh, I can't take that back. And
Yeah.
honestly, I mean, I got pregnant quickly, and then I waited to have my second child, which is you, because there was something about raising a child to the point where they were able to talk, and I could have more of it's just going to sound, I'm going to put this in quotation marks, rational discussion with them, as rational discussion you can have with a 5-year-old.
Right. Yeah.
And I also didn't see myself having two children at the same time in diapers.
Yeah. That sounds
I
hard.
kind of felt like it was good to have I really wanted to, and the second child, unfortunately, well, let me say that differently. Fortunately, and maybe unfortunately, depending upon the birth order, but I really felt that the 5-year difference between you and your brother worked out really well for me, because once you were born, he was in school. And initially he was only in school 3 days a week, and then he was in kindergarten for 5 days a week, and I could have that time that I had with him alone, I could have with you alone. And to me, that was very satisfying. Whereas people who have children closer together juggle 2 kids or more, and I'm not saying one is better than the other, not by any stretch. I think whatever you choose to do as a family, you choose to do. Especially if you wait longer in life to have kids, you wind up trying to get them quickly because you've waited. You know, I was 27. Maybe that was not that old, haha.
Young. I mean, in my
I know, right.
time
And then I was
line,
32, almost 33 the second time.
Yeah.
And I just felt really good about the fact that I had a lot of time with him by himself as an individual, and then I got to have that with you. Now, granted, I didn't have all that same amount of time because there was another child, but
Sure.
that child wasn't another toddler
Right.
who needed me in almost the same capacity as an infant would have.
Right. Yeah.
So, right. Yeah. And I also, so I think that didn't really think about that probably until I turned 25. But I never had the the benchmarks, like, oh, I have to have a house by this age, or I have to have a house before we have kids, or those things that didn't occur to me because I was not a product of parents who had a house when I was not until
Right.
I was much older, and those didn't seem to be big obstacles. Having a child, as long as you had a place to live,
Yeah.
and you could take care of primal needs, you should be
Yeah.
fine. Yeah. So I didn't think of it that it needed to be anything really extravagant. Over the years, I've watched how things have become way more extravagant, and I'm sure
Right.
for people who had money back in the day when I was having children, I'm sure there was more extravagance there. But now, because of social media, there was no reveal parties
Right.
back
Yeah.
when I was having kids.
You didn't have a gender
There
reveal.
was no, didn't have a gender reveal. There were cute things to buy for kids,
Sure.
but the merchandising has gone way out of crazy.
It is
And
so
what you
wild.
can
Yeah.
do, yeah, what you can do is, sometimes I think the simpler is better,
Better.
but
Yeah.
everybody has their choices. But yeah, so I think that, yeah, I think 25 was probably the milestone. I waited a while still. I finally decided at 27 that would, well, I didn't decide alone, of course. I decided with your dad, but mostly it was me.
Yeah.
And because the woman's life changes.
Right.
The human who's carrying the child really goes through monumental changes. The
Oh my
person
gosh,
watching
yeah.
the person goes through probably emotional ups and downs as well, but not to the extent, not physically to the extent
Right.
that the person carrying the child does.
Yeah. Like it
So,
becomes real for you when you get pregnant. Like that immediate first knowledge of finding out that you're
yes,
pregnant, but then for the other spouse or person who's not pregnant, I don't know that it becomes real for them until the baby is here on planet Earth.
probably. I mean,
You know?
you can, yeah. I mean, I think you can make them as much part of the experience as you can,
Yeah.
and they'll have all their own concerns as well.
Right.
But I think the person who is incubating human life has a lot of anxiety during that 9 months
Oh
time.
gosh. See,
You know,
that's a big reason why I don't know that becoming a parent is like my life trajectory because I am already filled with anxiety. I don't know
right.
about how adding a human to that mix would be like really great for them, for the human, for the baby, you know what I mean? Like there's
Right. I
just
mean,
so much you have to navigate.
well, you
Yeah.
do. There's a lot that you have to consider when you do bring somebody into the world.
Yeah.
And nowadays, there's even more to consider. Like, is there going to be a world? I mean, that's a whole
I mean,
other
yes,
thing.
it's not funny, but
No, it isn't.
so true though. I think that's like another big reason is like, well, gosh, do I want to bring a child? Or I mean, there's already children here that I could adopt potentially, but I think part of having kids sometimes is continuing your lineage or just
Right.
like seeing what you're going to look like. I think it's kind of whether that's selfish or not, I don't know, but it's kind of like one of those things that I think is very human. You want to see what you're going to look like, right? As a, if you have a baby, you want to see what that kid's going to look like, made from genes by you. But then I think about, yeah, you're right. Is there going to be a world? What's the world going to look like? Global warming. I mean, we're short right now of a huge monumental presidential election that could have ramifications for years and years and years to come. That could strip away the rights of so many people and marginalized folks and already marginalized folks. So yeah, I think my experience being queer and stuff also it makes it I can't really have an accident pregnancy, right? I have to
Right.
really plan it out. I have to really figure out, well, how am I going to get sperm? How am I going do I want to be pregnant myself? Do we get a surrogate? Like there's so many questions and then the financial aspect of that too. Not only giving birth is a financial thing, but so is paying for all the things up front because it's free to have a baby when you're straight. That's not free for me. I have to pay $500 for a vial of sperm. That's a whole thing. So it's a lot to think about. And I think when the pandemic hit when I was 30, I was like, oh, I kind of had this moment where I was thinking, well, I kind of like the way my life looks as it is. I don't feel like I'm missing anything. If I don't feel like I'm missing anything, then maybe children aren't in the picture for me. Because I can understand some folks that feel like something's missing and they want to have kids because that's the missing thing. But for me, it just felt like, well, I like my life how it is, and I like that I can be spontaneous and go on trips and not, worry about that aspect of who's going to take care of my kiddos. And also the financial aspect. I think if my trajectory hadn't included 4 layoffs in 4 years, I would feel more inclined to have children, but the financial precarity over the last 5 years for me in my life and my partner's life has just been so intense that I don't even understand. I mean, obviously there's so many people who go through layoffs and they already have children. So to not have children and go through that uncertainty and just dysregulation and monumental upheaval that a layoff brings, I don't know about bringing kids into that. That sounds so hard, and just the managing of that. And then on top of that, for me, watching you be a single parent, that's hard. Not that I watched you and was like, oh, you're having a hard time when I was a kid. That's not what it was like. But looking back on it as an adult and seeing all the things you had to do and take responsibility for and ownership of as a single parent, I look at that and it's like, when you choose to have kids, you have to choose to also be a single parent, potentially. I don't think, maybe you didn't think that when you were my age or when you were having children, but now I do because of my experience with what you experienced. And I think it rubbed off on me, obviously. So the trauma that brings for me too is like, I don't know that I want to be a single parent. And you kind of have to be ready for anything, I think, when you bring a kid into the world or you adopt a kid or however you make a family. But there's this other flip side too, where it's like, well, it could be nice to have a family and I wouldn't be opposed to that. And that sounds really beautiful and lovely in a lot of ways. So yeah, it's really complicated for me. I also think a lot of people get a lot of flack. Like, I don't know if you're on like social media with, I'm seeing a lot of child-free content or choosing to be child-free or like not have kids and stuff. And women can't win. And it's either they get flack from parents who are like, no, it's the best thing you will ever do and you're missing out and it's a love like no other and you won't ever experience that kind of love if you won't have kids. And yeah, it's hard, but it's worth it. And then the child-free people are like, well, I want to go traveling. And then they're called selfish if they choose not to have kids, while parents are told that it's selfless to have kids. So it's just this really complicated thing that's happening. I think more people are talking about, I think more people are being direct about these choices and transparent about these choices in a time I don't think it's ever happened before. I don't think when you were my age, people were talking about being child-free. It was like, oh, that couple's weird, they don't have kids. Mm-hmm. What's wrong with them that they don't have kids? They're not doing the adult thing.
They don't have children?
So
they
sad.
never had children? Right.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
When I think it could be like a really empowering choice either way. It's empowering to be able to choose your destiny. It's empowering to be able to say, yes, I'm going to have kids. It's empowering to be able to say, no, kids aren't in the cards for me, and leave it at that. And I don't have to ask a parent, why did you have kids? I'm asking because I want to know, like, what compels folks to have kids out of my own curiosity. But I think on the flip side, when parents ask child-free folks, it's like, what do you mean you don't want kids? And it's met with this, like, really weird sense of, I think humans want the other humans to experience what they're experiencing, and they just want them to be part of the struggle. Mm-hmm. And I think when parents it's a struggle, right? I mean, raising kids, that's hard. It's the hardest job ever. And there's no days off. It's every day. And I think when child-free people are like, at night, are met with, like, parents, they're like, whoa, like, it's okay if we're not having children, but some parents on social media are like, well, you're missing out. And why do you have to say to everyone that you're going to be child-free? Like, why don't you just keep that to yourself? Like, what's that about? But then there's whole parenting blogs and TikToks and Instagram dedicated to parenting, and they make that their whole lifestyle, right? So anyway, I could go on and on, but that's some of the things that I'm being met with right now as I'm like parsing out a future with or without children. And it's a lot, right? At the end of the day, you just have to make a choice for yourself. But it can be very hard because choices like this, I think, are really based in circumstance. And my circumstances are not ideal to bring a child into the world. And that's my reality. And it sucks. And people could say, oh, well, you'll make it work. But why would I want to make it work when if we're struggling to make it work? Like, yes, I understand parenting is a struggle no matter what, and even if you're making enough money to make it happen, but it's so complicated to just say like you'll figure it out. Cuz you will, but it's also like, well, I don't know if that's the right conditions to choose yes on a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so that was a lot, and so
I
let's see if
know.
I can.
Do you like my
Okay.
ADHD rants?
I don't think it's ADHD. I think that was a really great fetch, and that's what we're here for.
Yeah, we're going to be masters of kvetching.
Exactly. So what I want to say to many of the things that you said. So first of all, I think that in general, we have created a society that attaches a lot of meaning to certain life events, and the romantic ideal of falling in love, getting married, having children is a powerful aphrodisiac. And when you were talking about having children, I was thinking about during my lifetime and when I was younger, thinking about what it would be like to get married and have children. I thought of myself with daisies in my hair and a white lacy
Yeah.
hippie dress. Sorry, hippies, but I think you know what I mean. And children romping through grass and looking at sunflowers. It's all very idealistic, but the truth of the matter is, once you decide to have a child and bring that child home, it's messy and it's tiring and it's satisfying and it's joyful and it's loving. It's just a big mess of good and crazy and feelings that you don't often realize you're going to experience. You also don't know how your partner is going to relate to that experience. And if it's a man, it's going to be one experience. And if it's a woman or somebody who identifies it in a different way, it's going to be a different experience. So it's just a huge puddle of crazy, I think,
I
even
think
with
so
the
too.
most sane people. And so you can imagine in our world, we have people from so many different walks of life having children, many of which have children very thoughtlessly, and many who have that very thoughtfully. But the bottom line is, it's still a gooey situation, the way I think of it. So I love the idea of having children on either one of my hands and romping through tall grass. But the reality of that is slim to none when you get down to the everyday
Yeah.
stuff you have to do as a parent, right? And the problem is that once you make the decision to have a child, that you can't really turn back. The child is here now, and your main focus now is keeping that child alive. Let's not just dressing it up in cute outfits and sticking it on Instagram, but actually keeping that child alive, which is in itself, because we live in many areas of denial, we just do instinctually what we think is correct, and we rely on healthcare professionals and our parents to help us through these things. And some families are very well connected. Their cultural experience is to extend the family, so there's lots of hands on deck. And some families are very individualistic and independent, and grandparents visit, but they don't really done their job with you, and they don't necessarily want to do their job with your offspring. So these are things you need to take into consideration when you decide to have children, right? So I think I did it for the multiple reasons you brought up. Yes, it's a curiosity of what this child's going to look like. Yes, it's really cool to extend the lineage. Yes, it's really nice to add cousins to the mix and everybody can grow up together and all that. That's really wonderful until reality sets in where these people are going to move away and you're not going to see those cousins, or you get a divorce and now you're going to be sharing parental stuff, which doesn't always go greatly, or God forbid a parent passes away and now you're I was going to say stuck, but you are with raising a child all on your own. So there's a lot of stuff in that decision. Of course, when I decided to have children, I never thought that my parent partner was going to die. That wasn't in my playbook. That was a huge shock. But I also knew that once that happened, my goal was to continue parenting the way I parented prior to that incident happening. Because when you decide to have a child, tag you're it, and there's nothing you can do other than continue raising your child. And thankfully, I had some support of, parents on either sides and your grandparents. There were 6 of them, but they weren't an everyday inclusion. They weren't coming to rescue me or anything like that. I was pretty much on my own. So decisions I made after that were based on having children. So when I decided to go back to school and get my master's and credential, the thought behind that was, well, I can be on the same school schedule as my kids. This is going to be great. I love children. I loved them before I had children. I used to work with children in my prior life before I was married, and day camps and stuff like that. That was really cool. So I could do that. I didn't have a problem with. I enjoyed that. So going into teaching was kind of a no-brainer. But the reward for that was summers off with you and vacation time off with you. And so it wasn't as difficult as it is for some parents who work a regular traditional job, because I didn't have to ask for a lot of backup during that time. I could pick you up from school. I networked with a friend when your day went half day, and she would pick all the kids up and take them to her house, and everybody would do homework, and then I would come home, go over there a couple of hours later and be able to, be there. And so that worked out very well. And a shout out to my friend who was able to do that, because they also orchestrated their livelihood as a working parent to be able to coordinate being home for their children. So it worked out really well, and we were friends, and we were able to help each other that way. But my mother and father never said to me when I was married, when are you going to have kids? It wasn't until I finally had a kid that my mother said to me, I never thought you were going to have a child. So she was keeping that inside of herself for 27, well, not 27 years, but from the time I was able to have a child until I had a child, whatever. She was keeping that in, and I'm really happy that she did that. Because there were other people around us that couldn't keep their mouths shut, who ask, when you're going to have children, right? Because it's the traditional way to do that, and it's because they're interested in seeing the family proliferating, and that's the way you can do it. That's one way you can do it. So I was happy she didn't do that, and I took her lead, and I don't think I've ever asked you or your brother about that.
No, you haven't.
No, to the point that I've had the conversation with you, but I actually have never had the conversation with him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember we talked briefly about it when he was deciding to get married. And I mentioned these things that he might want to keep a forefront in his mind. Getting married, having children, all these things. If those things may come up, and how are you going to deal with them? But he never said to me, I don't want to have kids, or I'm not sure I'm going to have kids, or we never talked about that. And maybe that's the difference between having a son and a daughter. I don't know. But I don't like to say that, but maybe that is. But so I remember saying, which I think people didn't know how to take it when I would say it, when I was actively parenting you and your brother, and before your father passed away, I would say things like, I wonder why people decide to have children. After I'd already had children, I would say, why do they decide to have them or not have them? I mean, and I think that was because I realized, as much as I loved you guys and wanted to be a parent, it's a huge time suck, whereupon you put yourself completely, pretty much off to the side.
Yeah.
Unless you are See, I was not as good as I see some of the other younger generation and how they orchestrate their lives, and I wasn't as good at that
Yeah,
as
like
other
giving
people,
yourself time or having boundaries.
right? Or asking for help.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or making it more of a
Community.
community thing. I didn't, yes.
Which is still hard though. I mean, we're still a very traditional society where it's like a nuclear family,
Right.
where it really does take a village to raise children, but you have to really build that village
Right.
before you have kids, I think. I mean, and
Right.
you
I
can
mean,
continue to build it when you have them, but
yeah, I mean, I
yeah.
have a friend who had twins, and I don't even know if I ever told her, I commended her because I remember she would text us and say, "Anybody want to come over and hold a baby?" I mean, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
I never thought to do anything like that. I mean, yeah, she had her hands full. She had two at the same time. And so
Yeah.
she was saying, "Come on over. I need an extra hand here."
Yeah.
And that was great because that showed that it doesn't necessarily fall just on one person
Yeah.
or two people if they're both able to be at home at the same time.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think that the traditional questions, I just went to my 50th high school reunion, and the questions were, do you have grandchildren? Did this person ever have children? Did that person ever have children? Or
Yeah.
that was like the big deal thing. And I have to create a pat answer for myself besides just no for grandchildren, right? Because the response back, I don't think people understand how the response back is worse than the actual question. Because I'll say no, I not, or sometimes I'll just say not yet, or no, no, I don't, and they'll go, oh, and then what do you do with that?
I don't know. You say, well, it's actually fine. It's okay.
Yeah, I don't want, I'm going to make you feel better now. Oh, it's okay. I'm
Right,
fine.
right.
You
I know.
can be fine with that too,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah,
it's
it's weird.
it's
Do you,
weird.
because I feel maybe this is like Jewish guilt, but I'm like, oh, I don't know, it'd be nice to see you as a grandma, as a grandparent, and I feel like I'm, what's the word? Not allowing you to have that experience if I don't have kids. But do you feel any certain way about that? Because like I feel a little guilty about it if I end up not having children.
So, how truthful do you want me to be? I'll be truthful. You have one life. I'm 67 years old. If I'm not going to be truthful now, I'm never going to be truthful. Okay, so I'll answer that question. First of all, it's not your job to give me that experience,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Just like I said a long time ago, I was in a group and we were talking about children, and I said I didn't have children for an ulterior motive.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't. I didn't have children so that they could become a certain thing, or live a certain lifestyle, or identify as a certain gender. I had children for my own reasons,
Yeah.
and my hope was I was going to raise individuals who were going to be an asset, a productive member of society, whatever productive means for them. I wanted them to be basically law-abiding and productive and nice, kind people. And I think I
Yeah.
was able to do that.
Yeah. And then some.
But thank you, but I wasn't looking further, that much further. I would say that when I was younger, probably, I didn't think that I wouldn't have grandchildren
Yeah.
because I thought that was the natural process of things.
Yeah.
But as time was going and you and your brother were getting older, I was getting older, I started to realize that that might not come to fruition,
Right. Right. Right.
right? And then here comes the honesty part.
Yeah.
I love my mother, and I think she was a wonderful parent to me, and she was a really supportive grandmother.
Yeah.
But she also wanted to do her own thing, and because she had career aspirations and lots of hobbies, and sometimes I resented the fact that she wasn't as hands-on the way I wanted her to be hands-on with you. I didn't necessarily want, I loved it when she came over and made feather dolls with you and painted and all that, but it would have been nice if she just picked the baby up and fed the baby instead of coming to the house and wanting coffee and a donut and talk to me while I was trying to feed a baby and diaper a baby. She didn't quite pick up on those
And you didn't ask
cues.
her.
No.
You weren't like, here you go, have the kid.
Yeah, I didn't do it.
Eat something.
No. No, I didn't do that. And she would come over with puppies. She would want to give you these experiences.
That's right. Yeah, she was.
But
like
she
that.
didn't often do the grunt work. And my mother-in-law, on the other hand, your dad's mom, she would come in and give me that baby, go to bed, take a nap. I'm going to give the baby a bath. I'm going to feed the baby. I was like, whoa.
Whoa.
Because that was
5-star hotel.
Yeah, because she understood.
Yeah.
After having 5 of her own children, I think she understood. Whereas my mother, she was more about socializing, but not getting her necessarily her, hands dirty. I mean, there were times where she did it, but it wasn't what I needed, and I think I didn't know how to ask for it because I didn't want to offend my mother. And that's a
whole other conversation.
That's a conversation for another time. So the reason I'm talking about that is because I think I'm getting to that age where maybe I wouldn't be as great at wanting to change diapers and doing the grunt work. So part of me is like, well, I might not have to do that, but then I might not be able to get this either. That's my honest answer to that. I will say, though, if it did happen, I would probably get my hands dirty because I would do that. But I can see where I'm edging towards how my mother must have felt. So now I kind of understand her, and I sort of wish I hadn't resented her as much. I feel like she did her thing, and she didn't want to do it maybe again after having 3 children of her own. But yeah, so I will stick with my very first answer, which is you're not obligated to make me anything. Yeah. Just like I'm not obligated to make you anything.
Yeah.
Right?
So you wouldn't feel sad if I didn't have kids? Or would you feel sad and you would be okay with that feeling?
Well, I think that there's a feeling of not going through an experience that might be really amazing.
Sure.
But on the same token, there's amazing experiences I can have with you.
Sure.
And that I could have with your brother without having, And the other thing about, I don't know if any other people who are grandmothers now feel this way, but as a person who's not, there's also the anxiety of my child is going to be in charge of a child. I don't care how old that child is. Yeah. That's anxiety that right now I don't have to deal with.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Right, to be perfectly honest.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I feel like you're right. I think I'm noticing the friends that your relationships change when children are brought into the world. I mean, and it's a wonderful thing, but it's also like, you have to re-examine how you're going to show up. And I think a lot of times it's on the child-free people or the people who don't have kids yet to keep those relationships alive with parents. And that's a lot of pressure, and I think a lot of relationships end up not continuing on, like friendships, because raising kids is really just becomes your whole focus and world, and I think it's hard for people in our society to dedicate time outside of that just because of living under capitalism and the nuclear family and all of that. Like, we don't really live in a way that really helps parents and children. And I think maybe I would be more inclined to even have children if I felt like I would have help or felt that we would have more people around us. But the fact that we also live far away from family and then our friends keep moving, we would be on an island raising kids. I mean, not necessarily, but that's how it would feel. And that also is scary too. And the relationship expectations of your friends who are having kids, and that changes, and how you can't really have a full-on conversation with them anymore, and maybe a phone call is 5 minutes long and they're shouting at their kid in the background, or not shouting, but hey, whatever it is, it's like it's always an ear out here and not focused. And I think we don't talk about that either, how relationships change when people bring children into the world or decide to have kids too. So there's a lot here to talk about. There's just so many aspects to this conversation and to the realities of these choices.
Well, I think it's a good conversation because I think there's a lot of guilt wrapped around all the decisions that we make in life.
Yeah.
Because if you make this decision, you didn't make that one, and what it would have
Right.
looked like if I made that one, and you just can't live like that. I'm going to say a couple of things. The one word that came up to me big time when you were talking was trust. And one of the things that I didn't have a lot of was that somebody was going to take care of my child as well as I would.
Yeah.
So when you don't have that freedom of trust or enough people around you that you do trust, you wind up doing things on your own and you don't create enough opportunities for other people to step in. Right? I mean, there were situations where I had to leave a child with a babysitter or whatever, and it was never a freeing feeling to leave and go enjoy yourself when your child is being handled by somebody else.
Right.
It's just like
And-
having a cat or a dog.
Well, it is.
On steroids.
on steroids, and that's the thing. It's like I can relate. I'm a super empathetic person. I can see myself in other people all the time. I can really relate to people's experiences. No, I'm not a parent, but that doesn't mean I can't relate to your experience or have some sort of similarity. But yeah, when getting any animal or creature that's under your care and you're responsible for it, it brings a whole new level of anxiety to your life and a responsibility that it's not the same as having a kid. But it's also like, it's not different. It's not too much. It's not that different in the sense that you're taking care of something that bonds with you and trusts that you're going to be there and going to take care of them. And when we got cats, before I was like, oh, carefree life. And then we got cats and I was like, oh my God, did we close the window? Did we leave anything out? Can they get into that? Are they going to like each other?
Right.
Are they going to kill each other? We don't even know their relationship. Like all these things that one of my cats ate a green onion the other day and I panicked and I was like, am I going to have to pay $95 to call Animal Poison Control Center? Should I just call, I called my vet. I mean, so I already live in that kind of overwhelm, or like I'm a very light sleeper, and if I hear the cats doing something in the middle of the night, or if I can't hear the cats, like a lot of people sleep with white noise, that gives me anxiety. I need to be able to hear something if something is going wrong. Right. I don't like tuning things out. So yeah, I can only imagine myself. I mean, I know everyone says you adapt when you have kids and stuff, and you do, but like you said, you were constantly anxious about me and my brother, like when we were growing up and stuff, and it's like, yeah, that's a level of anxiety I don't know that I'm, capable of withstanding. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I don't know that. I mean, I think it's below the surface. I think that you do things and your mind's taken away from it. The other thing is if you're a person who cares and, is prepared, you think about these things. If you're a more self-actualized person, you're thinking about these things more maybe seriously than other people might be thinking about them. Maybe other people are more relaxed in certain situations and they're not as prone to worrying about what could happen. I was raised by a father who was very concerned and wanted to be prepared for things. And he was cautious, and I feel like I'm a cautious person too, but I'm not so cautious I don't leave my home. But I think that there's a level of cautiousness that you need to have as well when you're parenting, and the understanding that you can't just you can't let your kids run wild and expect things to work out. I remember coming home from the hospital with your brother, and we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, and originally the second bedroom was an office that we had for our business, and I disguised office looking things and put a crib in there and made it more like a nursery. And he was in the crib next door and I was in bed and in the middle of the night, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I'm never not going to be thinking about that other person on the other side of the wall ever again. That feeling of only thinking about yourself and perhaps your partner became so loaded with this enormity that person I'm always going to be thinking about. And the truth is that once you are parenting a child for the rest of your life, you have that going on, not to the intensity you do when they're in your household and you're raising them to be an adult, but even once they're in adulthood.
Yeah.
you're thinking about those things. So it is a lifelong commitment and occupation
Yeah. An unpaid position.
and role, that you do wind up taking on for sure.
Yeah.
And that's why, in retrospect, people say, well, would you have had children again? They've done lots of polls on this.
Right.
And a
Or
lot
do
of
you-
parents say, no, I
Right.
wouldn't probably have done that. Right. But I think what's happening for me now as I'm getting older is that I'm realizing that some of the things I would have or could have done without having children, I may never be able to do.
Right.
And I think about your dad's father, your grandfather. We were sitting and talking. He said to me, and this was when I was young, and he said to me, it comes a point, and he was talking from his point of view, when a man realizes he's never going to be a professional baseball player. And I think that was his way of saying we have to realize what it is we're going to be doing, and maybe we're settling, but let's see how the percentage of people on the planet become professional baseball players, and you need to make the decisions that sort of go in line with your personality and your talents or things that you have tried to learn, and live your life knowing that it's impossible to get to or be everything.
Yes, I struggle with that all the time.
And live with that. And I will say, as a little teaser, because we probably will talk a little bit about reunions and getting older, is that when I was happy to go to my reunion, I was happy to see the people that I saw there. I don't know if anybody else experienced what I experienced, because I have a feeling that I wallow in a lot of like you said, very empathetic, and I take in all this intuitive energy that's happening in the room, and I come home, and I had a letdown for a few days afterwards, because I realized that the same things I encountered in high school were somehow still happening in the room. And not only that, it made me realize that I made choices, or choices were made for me. And sometimes the world makes choices for you. And I'm not ever going to be able to go back to that time period and remake choices that would be different, right? So there is a bit of melancholy there, which I don't want to sit on too long, because I'm really glad that I went to my reunion. I saw people that I hadn't seen in a while, and I actually connected with people that I rarely talk to, and that was really fantastic. And the pictures are great to look at and all that. And I went with my husband, and I hadn't been to a reunion with a partner for 40 years.
Yeah.
And I went to almost every one of my reunions, like my 20th reunion. And so it was really nice, that space. But I'm going to tell you that this discussion reminds me of that. I'm bringing it up because for some of us who are intuitive and empathetic and all that, your life decisions kind of smack you in your
Haunt
face.
you? Yes.
Yes.
They haunt
You walk
me.
into the room and you start seeing your classmates, and you're going, oh, holy heck, I made these decisions, and this is why my life was this, or things out of my control happened, and this is why my life is this. And the art of comparison is deadly, and you should not do it. So when you're thinking of having a child or not having a child, part of that comparison starts coming into place. My friend is doing it, and maybe I should do it.
Right.
But I would suggest, I know it's an old show. I watched it when you were growing up. It was called 30-something.
Okay.
And I used to say to your dad, I'm going to go upstairs and watch tonight the life I led this afternoon. But there's a scene in one of the episodes, and maybe I'll be able to find it for you, where the single professional woman is now meeting her married professional friend who now has a child. And they're trying to have a lunch together. And the frustration of the non-parent with the parent is so palpable. And it makes the parent nervous. Because the person who's parenting wants to be the person who was
Who
not
they
the
were
parent at some point.
Before, yes.
And
And you can't.
You can't. It's
You can't.
flippin' possible.
Yes.
You can't unring that bell.
No.
So, yeah. So maybe
Yeah.
when I made decisions as a 27-year-old, they may have not seemed as earth-shattering as millennials making those decisions, because it didn't seem that a lot of the things that are going on in the world were as foreboding. There was crap.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. But maybe it seems like because we have more, the attention is brought more to it because we have this media to read and think about.
Right.
It probably makes it harder. But I will say that I have a lot of positive feelings for those people during the pandemic, and some of them are in our family, for their idealism to get pregnant and have children during
Right.
that time period.
I know. Totally. Totally.
Yes.
Totally. Yeah.
Yes.
I know.
It's just amazing to me that people went on, because to me, that's a sign of hope.
Yeah.
And you can show signs of hope in other ways. You don't have to have a child,
Right.
but that is one way.
Sure.
They're showing hope.
Yeah. Would you ever say that, because a lot of parents that I'm reading stuff on Reddit, you know what I mean? So,
Sure.
or on social media, and it's like some folks will ask like 30 somethings, like, do you have kids? If you don't, do you regret not, or do you regret having kids? And it's like, I don't think parents will ever say that they regret having kids, but did you ever feel like, ooh, you shouldn't have, or that it was really hard, and do you regret moments but not the children themselves? Like, what's...
Yeah, and don't regret the children. I think that what was hard for me was being isolated at times
Yeah.
and being tired.
Yeah.
I remember an incident at my mom's house, your grandma, and this was before you were born. I had your brother, and he was maybe 8 months old, and the whole family was downstairs. And I needed to be upstairs with him to put him to bed and feed him and put him to bed. And I had this just incredible desire to want to get downstairs, because I felt I was missing out. And I think that those moments crop up where you feel like you can't just be the person you want to be, because you have to stop and make sure that this person has everything they need before you do. Except for, when you're on an airplane and that whole thing. The air mask is a big deal. But in general,
Yeah.
you are having to constantly put your needs aside
Right.
for the
Yeah.
child, because they can't fend for themselves.
Right.
And when they get older, I mean, being that I was an elementary school teacher, I was always amazed how so many parents felt like, well, my kid's ambulatory, they can read, they can write, they can speak, so I don't need to be that involved. I'm like, no, they don't have fully developed temporal lobes. You will have to be more involved than ever.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
And I feel like going back to people who are child-free or choose that, it's like, I think there's this stigma that against child-free people, of course, and then there's also the stigma that like child-free people don't think thoroughly about having kids, because if not having kids is selfish. But I just want to say, for the record, I've thoroughly thought about it over and over and over for many, many years now. So it's not something that I take lightly whatsoever. And I think, yeah, like what you said earlier, I think a lot of children are brought into the world thoughtlessly and also sometimes violently. So,
Yes, absolutely.
So there's a lot,
Absolutely.
there's a lot
There's a
there
lot
to
wrapped
think
around
about.
it.
There's a lot
But it's
wrapped around it. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it's interesting that you use the term child-free. We use just the term, we just used to say he's not a parent.
Right.
They're not
Well,
parents.
this is what I'm saying about this kind of societal shift now. We're labeling everything. It's not
Yeah.
like it's not like you don't have kids. It's you're child free. Did you choose that? Because somehow choosing that is like more of a stigma than you can't have kids because of biological reasons, or
Why does it matter?
It doesn't, but like I'm saying, there's like all
Yeah.
these stigmas around people not choosing to have kids, people choosing to have, like, whatever it is. It's like,
I don't know.
Yeah.
That sounds to me, if there's a stigma about not having kids, there must be resentment for the people who decided to have kids.
Maybe I think that's probably like what
So
I was
just
saying
keep
earlier about about parents wanting you to be in their group and like suffer with you. I think that's
Right.
like a
Is
human
there, like,
experience,
company?
right? Yeah, it's like you want someone else to be able to relate. You want
Loves.
to complain with someone, or you want to have this shared experience, so you know you're not the only one. Because I think parenting is isolating, whether you have a partner or not.
It
You
is.
know, who else is up at 3 a.m. rocking a kid to sleep? I mean, it can
Yeah.
feel very lonely, even if you have a wonderful community around you. I mean, I feel lonely in my life sometimes, and I don't have kids, and I have wonderful community too. So it's just one of those things. It's just part of the human experience. But yeah, I think you're right. It does sound a lot like resentment.
Yeah, it does. So I like to go on the record by saying I don't think one choice is better than the other, and we need to stop doing that in this
I agree.
society.
Yeah.
And I also think that the word selfish, I come to learn in therapy, is not a negative,
Yeah.
unless you're doing things in particular that are negative towards somebody else. But if
Or
you
toxic.
are
Yeah.
right, if you're taking care of yourself and you know that this is the right course for you, then that's not being selfish. Well, it's selfish in a more positive way. And secondly, if you feel like you have a whole life, it's like what I dealt with when I was single. Well, do you have a whole life because you don't have a partner? How can you possibly enjoy yourself if you don't enjoy it with a partner? So we, in this world, and primarily in America, we have all these, everything is a this or a that. It can't
Yeah.
be both at the same time.
No, we have a really hard
Right?
time with that existing.
We really
Yeah.
have time holding different ideas at the same time and saying they're okay.
But that's what life
So-
is.
Right,
Life
and
is
there-
all about the gray. Yeah.
Right. There might be a moment where I say to myself, oh, yeah, it would have been great to have grandchildren. And that moment might be fleeting. And you might say to yourself, oh, yeah, maybe I thought that, maybe it would have been, maybe I should. And then that moment's fleeting. But if that's not something that is, if not having a child is keeping you from a full life, then you're giving that child a job. And no child should come into the world with a job.
The job. Yes, I agree. I agree.
They're not there to mend marriages and fill holes. You got to fill your hole way before you decide to have a child, or do it while you're having a child, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But those voids are not meant for another human being to take on your crap.
Yes.
Because they're going to take on your crap even when you made a
Regardless.
very thoughtful
Right.
decision to have a child. Because
Absolutely.
nobody's perfect.
Yeah. Case in point.
Nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So would you do it again, Mom?
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't be having this fantastic podcast with you and being able to see all the stuff that my son is doing. So, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
would totally do it again. And I would have done it with a partner, and regrettably I didn't get it to do that. And I had really, it was very fulfilling, thankfully, that once I didn't have a partner, that I had you two.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
true.
So that
Yeah.
was a huge thing for me.
A challenging bonus.
Yes, totally. Totally. And I know all through the years I'll find out how crappy I may have been crappy in certain areas, but I'm going to look at it as the whole thing and think to myself, it didn't go so badly.
I mean, I think once you lose your spouse and you lose your father, you can only go up from there.
From there. Absolutely.
I mean, that's the hope, and I think you did. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And right back at you.
Oh, thank you.